Welcome to another thrilling episode of Game of Thrones Abridged with your host, AltSwiftX. Today we're discussing the 15th chapter of the second book, Arya 4. It's an Arya chapter, which is exciting because Arya, let's be honest, is the best character. Because she has all this shit thrown against her, and yet she persists and gets through it, and yet is changed tragically by the shit through which she goes. This chapter is kind of a downer. This chapter is a dark one, in one of many dark chapters for Arya Stark. I think this is a turning point because, I mean, what defined Arya's previous book, her arc in the first book, was the death of her dad. She had been a Stark of Winterfell. She was a tomboy. She didn't quite fit in. She had conflicts with her sister and with like gender norms and stuff. But at least she knew who she was. Whereas now her dad's head hit the floor and the penny dropped and everything came crashing down. She lost her family. She lost her home. She lost her direction, and she had to start masquerading as a boy. She started calling herself Arya. She lost her name, and her identity has started to be worn down. And I think, the last 3 chapters in this book, Arya has been on this sort of slow travelogue, winding her way north, trying to get home with Yoren and the Night's Watch boys, but I don't think the full consequence of her new reality has quite set in. And this chapter is when that happens, because she realizes that, okay, like, this is not just my life that's changed. This is not just my circumstances. This is not a temporary thing, the death of my dad and this shit that's happened. No, this is a world-changing calamity. This is war. This is an anti-war chapter that shows how the effects of the new War of the Five Kings and the Lannisters' raising of the Riverlands are having profound, terrible, horrible effects on everything. This is the state to which Arya must adapt, and the things you must do to adapt to this state are horrifying. And they set a precedent for the dark path down which Arya will walk. So this is a rough one. This is a downer. There's not a lot of hope in this, because this is the beginning of George Martin's deep critique of war. So let's begin. So Arya's traveling with Yoren and the boys. She's trying to get home, and I think her hopes of home are gonna get crushed just a bit more in this chapter. So Arya. So it starts nice. It starts nice. This chapter is a really delicious descent into darkness. It's this very gradual descent where dread is piled on brick by brick. It's like the frog in the boiling water, and the water just slowly transmutes into boiling blood, because shit gets real gradually. It starts idyllic. It starts with the beauty of nature. The first line is that the river is a blue-green ribbon shining in the morning sun. What a beautifully hopeful line. The morning sun shining. Reeds grow thick in the shallows among the banks, and they're not talking about Mira and her glutes. And there's a water snake in the river, ripples spreading out behind it as it went. A hawk flies above in lazy circles. Lazy circles. That hawk's got nowhere to be. That hawk's just riding the thermals like Tobias in Animorphs. He's just enjoying it. He's just having a good time. This first paragraph is so chill and hopeful, but it all turns to shit very quick. And it seems a peaceful place until they spot the dead man, because there's a dead man floating in the river. And I think this starts this interesting sort of like nature versus humans theme in this chapter. Like, there's so much beauty in the nature that's all around them until the imposition of goddamn human beings ruining everything, bleeding and poisoning that river. Lomi says, "Oh, I told you there was bodies in the river. I could taste them in the water." The human death from this war is not just affecting the human world, it's bleeding literally into the river and polluting it with horror. And I think that nature versus man thing develops further as this chapter goes on. So it starts nice and things start getting worse. I want you to remember, though, remember Arya's like previous sort of travel story in the first book was Arya's journey from Winterfell to King's Landing. Rather a different trip, although it had its own disasters. But remember when, Arya's traveling with, her family and with King Robert and Queen Cersei and Prince Joffrey, and Arya was so excited. Sansa wanted to stay in the wheelhouse, and she wanted to hang out with all the princesses and all the ladies. But Arya wanted to go out and ride and see the swamps and the marshes and see the animals and go and play with Micah and get in mud up to her waist, seeing all the cool things and go see the rubies by the ford. And Arya wanted to adventure, and that was her previous sort of travel story. But now we realize that, adventure, not so much fun. It's almost like Quentin, actually. Like Quentin Martell in book 5 wants to go on an adventure. He wants to go and marry the princess and kiss the frog and so on. Doesn't work well, and I think this is Arya starting to experience adventure and discovering that it sucks. Anyway, so there's a dead guy in the river, and Yoren, who's leading the party, asks them to rob the corpse because humans suck, I guess, and we got a grave rob. There's a nice sort of moral grayness about Yoren and his party because of this survival situation that they're forced into, that they are forced to do things like rob graves and forage for food out of people's houses and take stuff and steal stuff, which kind of gives them, are these guys outlaws? Are they legit? Whose side are they on? They say they're the Night's Watch and that they're neutral, but what? It's not heroic. They're not out to save the world. They're just trying to get by. And in that sort of grey murk, that fog of war, it's hard to feel like a good guy. So they rob the corpse, and there are some funny names among the Night's Watch recruits: Dobber, Wath, Karen, Koss, like Wath. Who the fuck would call their child Wath? Can you imagine having a beautiful baby boy and thinking, you look like a Wath to me? It sounds like a third-rate Pokemon at best. I think George Martin comes up with lots of names, and the good ones he gives to his main characters, and the shitty ones he just gives to all of the Colluckets of the world. And so on the corpse, they find a little bit of coin, a little bit of whatnot, but they also find a little hank of blonde hair tied up with a red ribbon, which is just a lovely, simple way to humanize this dead guy. It's saying that this isn't just a corpse, this isn't just meat, this is a person who had a story. It's a story that's hinted at there, a little love story. Who was this person who this guy loved, and what did he lose by dying, and what might have been? And it just is an invitation to reflect on the tragedy of what's happened. And I think that, I've said it before, I think one of the best things about Game of Thrones, or the books specifically, is the way they humanize even people you wouldn't normally think about. One of the things that's great about Arya's arc in this book specifically is the way that it shows us the common people and the way that they suffer, whereas the show skipped most of that. Anyway, so they strip the corpse, and Lomi throws some mud at Hot Pie and calls him Mud Pie, and there's still some sort of fun, jovial hanging out, because these are children, remember, and there's still sort of a fun vibe that just gradually evaporates as the chapter proceeds. Someone catches a fish. This guy Kurz catches a fish with his bare hands, which is pretty badass. And Arya is not all that impressed. Arya thinks that catching a fish doesn't look all that hard. I caught cats for Syrio Forel, and fish don't have claws, so it's just got to be as easy. And I like Arya's sort of arrogant, sort of can-do, brave face that she's putting on. And also the catching cats is of course a reference to what Syrio Forel had Arya do in his training of Arya. And Syrio is repeatedly mentioned throughout this chapter and throughout Arya's arc because he had such an influence on her, and Yoren has an influence, and I just think it's so sad that, so many of the people who have had the greatest influence on Arya, some of Arya's best friends, are dead, which sucks. So, catches a fish, and Yoren is trying to figure out what to do. The Riverlands seems to be on fire. There's smoke everywhere as far as they can see. And there's a great shot in, season 4, episode 1, I think, where like Arya and the Hound are riding, and there's this great wide panning landscape shot of all the fires, in this sense that the war has fucked everything up. And so Euron describes the plan. He wants to go north, up the river to the God's Lake island, and he draws a circle in the mud to indicate this plan, which I'm pretty sure doesn't work in real life. Like, they always are doing that in fiction. They're like, oh yeah, just get a stick and draw in the dirt and everyone can clearly see it. Have you ever tried actually doing that? It doesn't work. But anyway, so they want to go north, but they're sort of improvising the plan. They're sort of making it up as they go along. They want to try and find a boat at this town that's on the lake, and maybe they can sail across the lake, and they don't want to go to the King's Road because there were those gold cloaks pursuing them, and they're just sort of trying to figure it out as they go along. And Yoren's like, oh, we should go and take shelter at Harrenhal. Lady Went lives at Harrenhal, and she's been a friend of the Watch, so we'll be safe at Harrenhal. And spoiler, no one is safe at Harrenhal. Lady Went is long gone, and Harrenhal's occupied by the worst of the Lannisters. Hot Pie says, oh, there's ghosts in Harrenhal. And Yoren's like, that's ridiculous. There are no ghosts in Harrenhal. And Arya dismisses the stories of ghosts. But of course, the truth is that there are worse things than ghosts in Harrenhal. There are men. There's the Tickler. There's the Mountain. You should be more afraid of them than you would be of any ghosts. So Arya also thinks about like King Harren, who built Harrenhal and got roasted alive. And apparently Old Nan told a story that people who go to sleep in Harrenhal sometimes just burst into flames in the night and die, which is rough. It's also a reminder that not everything that Old Nan says is true. Like, people are always keen to say that, man, Septon Bath and Old Nan and the Ghost of High Heart and all these sort of like vague mystical figures, they're right about everything. I don't think the spontaneous combustion story that Old Nan says is true. So anyway, Arya is hopeful. Arya wants to get back to Winterfell and to her family, and she thinks that, hey, at Harrenhal there'll be knights, and knights, they take an oath to defend the innocent, and if I can just find a knight, they'll take me home and I'll be safe. And of course that's desperately wrong, because very soon Sir Armory Lorch, the knight Sir Armory Lorch, will arrive, and he will not protect the innocent. He will not help Arya home. He will burn and kill and rape and rave. So Arya is having further disillusionment. She's learning that the death of her father and the Lannisters attacking, that was not a one-off. This is the new reality that she's living in, and she's got to adapt to it. And it also parallels like Sansa, of course. Like Arya was always making fun of Sansa for believing in all these love stories about the knights and the gallantry and the pageantry. But Arya clearly has a whiff of that too, about, knights being these heroic figures, and spoiler, it does not work out. So they go along this river track heading towards this town, and they find this house that seems to be abandoned. Yoren thinks that the people who lived there might be dead, or they might be hiding, and they go and search the house to find anything that might be useful. And it's this first sort of ominous moment, it's the second sort of ominous moment, as this moment of tranquility and nature slowly descends into an inferno of death and blood. They steal some food. They head through the fields. There's wheat and there's corn and there's barley ripening in the sun. There's all this food and prosperity that is just going to waste because there are no people here reaping the fields because of the war. And it's just this fucking tragedy of the waste of it all. Like, war is not just terrible because people get killed. War is terrible because of just the resources, the life, the materials, the labor that is wasted, which of course leads to poverty and death and starvation very soon. One of the worst things about the War of the Five Kings is not just all the soldiers that are killed with axes and arrows, but the people who were killed by starvation and disease and mismanagement and just loss. There's a further ongoing cost that's going to be paid dearly when the winds of winter descend. So and that's like true of the real world, right? Like they say that famine is no longer a natural phenomenon. Famine and starvation are man-made phenomena now, like recent famines in like East Africa and whatever. Like, they're not the result of, crops not growing. They're the result of political mismanagement. They're the result of conflict. They're the result of economic and issues. Just like this corn and barley ripening in the sun in Westeros. It's the tragedy of man-made disaster. None of this is necessary. It's all about the hopelessness and pointlessness of war. This conflict that we have later in this chapter, it's not a fight between, people who stand for something. This is not ideological. This is not heroic. This is not for anything. It's just the pointlessness and emptiness of war. And of course, George Martin was a anti-war activist to some extent, or at least was a what's the term? A pacifist, a non. What's the term? He refused to fight in the war. And all of that anti-war sentiment is soaking this chapter. Don't like it, Yoren says when he sees there's no people around. So we've got this sort of spookily sort of dread creeping in the corners. This chapter is actually kind of a bit like the prologue of A Game of Thrones, the very first chapter in the series, because that chapter was about creeping and traveling and things getting more and more ominous and spooky. Oh yeah, thanks. Conscientious objector, that's the term I was thinking of. Thanks, Arkahan, in the chat. But yeah, that prologue of book one was all about slowly traveling and these signs that something is not quite right until at the very end the evil strikes. And the evil in that chapter was the White Walkers. It was a supernatural, magical threat, whereas here the creeping threat that finally arrives and turns everything to shit is humans, not nature. So Yoren is like, let's keep on moving, and Arya is frightened by the empty town. There's goose prickles up her arms, and they're trying to look for a boat. And Arya's thinking, like, why has everyone run away? Why is this town abandoned? Why is no one around? What could scare them so much? And I think, as in, like, all horror, the real way to scare a reader or a viewer is not by showing you the monster right away, it's by leaving it to your imagination. You only get glimpses of the evil, and so whatever you fear most, you can imagine in its place, like a boggart. Let the reader scare themselves, because they know better than the writer or the creator what evil scares them most. And there's a jump scare when a shutter bangs in the wind, and it's like, whoa, it's very spookily. And then they go up to the lake, the God's Eye Lake, and Arya looks at the tranquil surface of the water, shimmering like a beaten copper, and she washes herself in the lake. And there's this brief moment of peace and hope, which is nice. But then, yeah, things get bad again, because there's no boats. They can't sail across this river without boats. So what's the plan now? They've got to figure out something better. Arya's whole arc is just this procession, this succession of moments of, maybe I can not have a shit life, maybe I can escape this, but it goes bad almost immediately, over and over. Thanks very much for the super chat from Stephanie Morris, who says thanks for the stream. Thank you, Stephanie. Hope you're enjoying. So Lommy's like, hey, let's go to the inn. Let's get some food. Let's get some ale. And I think Lommy's got the right idea. Have a drink. Now's a good time for a drink, with the king's men pursuing everyone. But it's better than the water, I suppose. The corpse water. When it's a choice between corpse water and ale, I suppose you reach for the ale. And so Arya is feeling kind of despondent, that there's no boats, and she dreams that maybe I could swim all the way to Winterfell. She's constantly got her mind on this goal of Winterfell, which she slowly sort of loses touch with as her identity is worn away and as her hope is likewise. I told you this is a real downer of a chapter. And they look around the boathouses, try to look for something. They find a mother cat with a litter of newborn kittens. All these little reminders that, nature, animals, life is going on in the context of this man-made disaster of war. So they don't find a boat, and everyone's like, what are we going to do if we haven't got a boat? And Gendry's like, oh, maybe we could build a raft to get across the lake. And I think that's part of what's horrifying about this situation is the lack of a plan, the lack of direction, the lack of a distinct hope. When everyone's just muddling their way through the fog of war, it's all the more dark when there isn't some beacon, some direction. They're all just trying to fucking yeet their way across Westeros without a plan, which is a disaster. But they find there's like this holdfast, this little mini castle thing that they want to sleep in tonight. A moment of safety. Yoren says that I like the feel of stone walls about me when I sleep. And Arya is like, all these people are gone, so there must be some danger. We're not safe here. We've got to run away. And Yoren and Lomi makes fun of Arya for being like cautious, whereas Yoren's like, no, that's smart. You got to be cautious to be smart. And Yoren is someone who's old by virtue of being cautious, I think. And Yoren is like, well, don't worry, man. Like, the Night's Watch is neutral, and so no man is our enemy. Like, we're not part of this war, so, like, we should be cautious, but, like, come on, no one's going to attack us. No man's our enemy. But then Arya says, and no man's our friend. And so, like, it's this horrifying condition of the war that, like, if you're not taking a side, no one's going to look out for you. No one's going to protect you. Being neutral is not enough. In the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, right? You can't opt out of what's going on. This has become a zero-sum game. You ever played Hungry Hippos? You ever played Very Hungry Hippos? It's just a matter of how many fucking pellets you can eat, man. There's one winning hippo and there's no one else. There's no compromise. You win or you die in the game of Hungry Hippos. Because you can't work together. You can't make an alliance with your hippo friend and thereby prosper more together. No. It's a hippo eat hippo world. It's a hippo eat pellet eat. That's what the war is like. War of Five Kings. So they go into the castle and and the walls are rough, unmortared stone, 10 feet high, which I struggle to look, I'm not a stonemason. I struggle to imagine building a 10-foot high wall without mortar. How does that work? Are you just stacking up rocks? I mean, I guess you're shaping the rocks so that they fit together nicely. But, like, goddamn, can you imagine? There's this great bit in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where, like, Arthur is like, yeah, man, I come from Earth, where there's species called humans, and, like, we've done some cool stuff. Like, there's, like, pyramids and science and art and stuff, and this alien's like, well, what can you do if humanity's so great? If you're a human, like, what can you do for us? Like, and Arthur just has this moment of realizing that, oh my god, like, I come from, like, a civilization and a planet that pretends to have achieved something, but I can't do so much as build a toaster. The most basic sort of human thing of our world. I'd have none of it within me. Like there's a similar moment before when Lomi is like, well, we've got trees, why don't we build a boat? And Yoren's like, do you know how to build a boat? And Yoren's like, and Lomi's like, nah. It's only through cooperation that humans can achieve anything. I mean, at least in the world we've built now, with specialization and delegation and inter-reliance and all that Durkheimian fun stuff, you can't survive on your own. And that's why war is such a fucking disaster, because war is the breakdown of the order, and war is the breakdown of cooperation. And when we can no longer cooperate, we are truly fucked. Some people in the chat suggest that we should do an Alt Swift X Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy Abridged series. I'd have a go. I think that would be great. I mean, I think that the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is already the abridged Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Like, you can't go off on tangents on a story that is already all tangents. Like, I don't think the Hitchhiker's Guide would be made better by me interjecting and rambling over it, because it's perfect, But that said, I'd be happy to desecrate it by rambling over it sometime, so maybe we'll do that. I mean, we've got to finish Animorphs, of course, Anyway. So they go inside the castle, and there's a trap door in the stronghold conveniently. That's going to be very helpful later. And they move all of their people and all of their animals into this castle to lay low for the night. And they've got geese and they've got chickens with them and so on. The animals are being dragged into the war, man. Nature is being taken along. And Gendry is sent to go and cut wood with an axe. And Arya says, "Why can't I split the wood?" she asks, but no one listens. And I think that's Arya sort of like bucking against gender roles again. Like that was one of the big things in book 1 was that, she resented having to do all the feminine needle work and whatever when she wanted to go and do stuff that is normally prescribed for men, like fighting and adventuring and stuff. Why can't I split the wood? She asks. And I do kind of wonder, is it possible that anyone in Yoren's group actually sort of suspects or knows that Arya is a girl, not a boy? Because this whole time she's trying to pretend to be Arya, the orphan boy. Yeah. And we got a food description. Arya eats a chicken leg and a bit of onion. That's maybe the shortest food description in this entire goddamn series. Honestly, that is the most restrained that George Martin has ever been, because normally we'd be talking about grease and chins and bubbling capons and geese inside hams, inside turkeys, inside even larger hams. Normally the food descriptions are lavish, but I guess not. Stephanie Morris in the chat says, "You want a good ACOK Abridged, but you need a bad Animorph." And yeah, new slogan. God, we've got to get back to Animorphs. I think someone did a calculation, and if we continue the Animorphs Abridged series at the current rate, we'll be finished in the year 23,000. But damn, if I don't love me some Animorphs. Anyway, Gendry is polishing his helm. And I can't help but think that that's a euphemism for masturbation. I'm pretty sure they make that joke in at the what is it, the Peach, the brothel that they visit later on. George Martin's a dirty man. And there's also this crying girl, whimpering and weeping. This is the girl who later gets called Weasel, who they found the other chapter. Just this innocent, common girl caught up in the horror of the war, who is so just traumatized and broken that she doesn't speak. She does nothing but weep. And it's just one of the many just tiny moments of despair that is dotted throughout Arya's arc. And so they're chillin', and Arya's honing needle, and she's thinking about Syrio Forel again. And Hot Pie tries to chat. Hot Pie's like, "Hey, where'd you get that cool sword? Have you got any siblings? Like, what's going on?" But Arya, because she has to hide her identity as Arya, she brushes off Hot Pie and sort of rejects him and doesn't want to talk about her siblings. And she says, "Oh, I know how to kill people who bother me." And so, she resorts to violence. And I think that's a really nice sort of, microcosm of what this story does to Arya. It takes away her identity, it forces her to stop being Arya, and all that Arya has left is violence and the necessity to survive. It's this horrible indoctrination into a child soldier is sort of what Arya goes through this book. But she goes to sleep and she has a dream that a wolf is howling. And of course, a wolf is a reminder of Arya's Stark identity. So it's interesting that right after Arya had this moment of denying her identity and hiding the real her, she then has a dream, and then out of, down in the subconscious, Arya's true identity, her direwolf identity, still lurks. It's all still there in the deep down. And even when we get into book 5, and even when we get into the Faceless Man and Blind Beth and Cat of the Canals and all of that, even when it's pushed down so deep, there's still Arya Stark down there somewhere. So Arya has wolves in his head, sneers Lomi, because Arya wakes up startled and afraid and says, "Oh, some sort of shit's going down," and everyone else around her is like, "What are you talking about? Nothing's going down." But this wolf in her head was howling, and it was warning Arya. And of course, moments later, the horn blows, and they realize that the Lannisters' armory lorch have turned up and are starting a party. So these wolves warned Arya, and I wonder if it's possible that, like, was this some sort of warg connection? Like, is it possible that Nymeria is hanging out with these wolves out there? Is this some sort of direct supernatural thing going on, or is it just sort of coincidence? Or did Arya just hear actual wolves in the distance and she just heard them better than the others do? It doesn't really matter. I mean, the point is that this Stark wolf connection is real and important, no matter how much Arya pushes her true identity down. And so everyone gets ready to get their shit together to confront this new threat. Everyone grabs their weapons and whatever. And meanwhile, Jack and Hagar and Biter and Rorge are currently in that cage, chained up because they're considered too dangerous. And Jack and Hagar says, "Boy, sweet boy, is it war, red war? Free us. A boy can fight. A man can fight." So Jaqen's trying to get Arya to free him. And I think it's really impressive that, like, even when Jaqen is in extremely dire circumstances, he's about to almost roast alive, he's still committed to the role of Jaqen Hagar. Because remember that Jaqen is, of course, a faceless man. Presumably he wasn't really born in Lorath. He isn't really named Jaqen, but he commits to the character, And I wonder if, Jaqen, like Arya, has a real identity deep down within his heart. Or if Jaqen truly has embraced the ideology of the faceless man and is truly just no one. Is Jaqen just as real an identity to him as any other identity? Is it possible to truly destroy the self? Arya goes up to the walls at the top of the castle, and the parapets are a bit too high for Arya, and she's a bit too short, so she can't quite see over the walls. And that's like this startling reminder that, like, in this battle that's about to start, Arya is a child. Like, she's like 9 years old, and just this moment of she's too short to see over the walls is just like this tragic moment of, like, oh god, like, this is what's actually happening. And so there are these people coming into the town, these riders throwing torches onto the houses, and flames rise up, and they're just burning this town. And there's about 100 or 200. These are Armory Lorch's men approaching the stronghold that they're staying in, and there's fires starting to roar all around. Everything seems red or black or orange. This is the war. This is the red tide of war sweeping in like a tsunami. This is death. And everyone's trying to get their shit together, and the crying girl Weasel clutches at Arya's leg, and Arya wrenches her leg free, and she says, "What are you doing here? Run and hide someplace, you stupid." She shoves the girl away. So this is like another moment where, like, just like Hot Pie earlier, someone tries to, like, make an emotional connection with Arya, and Arya's response is to kick her away. Because in this survival war situation, it's not possible for Arya to make human connections. The horror and the violence and the necessity to survive prevents Arya's emotional well-being and relationships, and that's, like, continual throughout her whole arc. She's more and more isolated and alienated as a result of the horror of the situation that she's in. So that's fucked. Next page. So the riders turn up to the holdfast and they say, "Open in the name of the king." And Yoren's like, "Yeah, nah, fuck off, please." And Armory Lorch is like, "Oh, who are you? Like Beric's Cravens or Thoros?" And we have all these, like, nice rumors and all the reputation of the Brotherhood Without Banners is established long before we ever meet Beric or Thoros. It's the same with Harrenhal. We get lots of talk about Harrenhal before we ever see it, and I think that's and it's just the same as this whole chapter, the way it slowly ramps up the horror in the chapter. This whole thing is a nice little lesson in how to do good writing. You don't just shove the monster or the evil or the climax in someone's face, phrasing. You have to slowly introduce the elements, and introduce the mystery and the intrigue, and engage the reader's emotion and imagination before you hit them with the bit that is spooky. Welcome, Gliders, to the chat. So Yoren does some shouting, and he shows his black cloak. He waves his black cloak down at Armory Lorch and says, "Look, I'm a Night's Watchman. We are neutral. We have nothing to do with this war. You don't need to deal with us. It's fine." And at the talk of Beric, Arya remembers that she saw Beric Dondarrion way back in King's Landing. She remembered this pretty knight that Jane Poole, Sansa's friend Jane, was in love with, and it's just this poignant reminder of like how there was a better time before this horror that everyone's experienced right now. A different person in a different life, Arya thinks. That was something that happened to Arya Stark, not to Arya, the orphan boy. So this is one of many, 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 many reminders of how Arya's losing her identity and a sense of self. And so Armory Lorch has a face that's pale and piggy, and he says, I am Sir Armory Lorch, bannerman to Tywin Lannister, hand of the king, the true king, Joffrey, and all around them the town burns. Which is such a great ironic moment, because Armory Lorch is saying, I am a servant of the legitimate authority, the protector of the realm, King Joffrey. Meanwhile, he's burning down the fucking realm. The fires are all around them. So what kind of fucking system of government, what kind of legitimate authority can Armory Lorch claim? What legitimate authority is Joffrey? What kind of king is Joffrey when his servant is going around burning things? And Arya's like, what the fuck is Armory doing? We are obviously not soldiers. Why are we being antagonized by Armory Lorch? And Gendry's like, that they don't care. Armory Lorch was sent out here by Tywin to burn and reave and to send a message to the Riverlanders and to send a message to Robb Stark. He doesn't give a shit. This is a war crime, baby. And so we're adjusting to that new reality. And Yoren says, no, you've got my word. We're not hiding any outlaws. We're not trying to fuck with you. We're just cool. We're just Night's Watchmen. We're just crows. Let us fly. And Armory Lorch is like, you give me your word? That means nothing to him. He laughs. Words are wind. And I think like one of the things that's going on here is it's exploring how war just breaks down all the conventions, all of everything that holds people together. War erodes and shatters those bonds. So like the idea of like honor and like your words having meaning and the authority of the king and like and you know, being able to get a boat at a dock and like being able to cooperate and rely on each other and neutrality of the Night's Watch and like all the things that hold people together are just demolished by the war. It breaks everything. Open these gates, says Sir Armory, and Yoren says, nah. And Yoren's like, I've got innocent, like, young boys in here. I've got children in here. And Armory says, young boys and old men die the same. So, guys, I think it's possible that Sir Armory might be a bad guy. So, someone throws a spear at the Night's Watchman, at the recruits, and this guy, Wath, takes a spear to the throat. And let's be honest, I mean, George Martin was sitting there going, who should I kill? Which of these red shirts should die first? Let's get rid of Wath. Like, let's be honest, George was frankly embarrassed by the whole Wath situation, so I think he was right to get rid of him. Glider says, if Swift says Aardvark, I'll start making videos again. Aardvark. Your word is your bond, Glidus. You better get producing. And so someone gets speared, and then, you know, a party always gets worse once someone gets speared. Storm the walls and kill them all, Sir Armory Lorch says in a bored voice, which is one of the more depressing parts of this. He's almost like a bureaucrat, you know, just sort of rubber stamping an atrocity. It's the idea that not only people are being murdered for no reason, there's no emotion behind it, there's no real rationale, there's not even a strategic advantage for Tywin. Even like this is an empty village. Like maybe he can achieve something by scaring villagers away or something. He's just fucking destroying infrastructure and people's houses for no reason. So, it's horrible. And Arya yanks Hot Pie down by the back of his tunic so he doesn't get a spear in him. And it's good. I'm glad that at least Arya's got HP's back. She might not be allowing Hot Pie to make a bond and chat, but at least Arya's keeping Hot Pie alive. And Yoren says, defend the wall, and the fight begins. And Yoren says, oi Lomi, pull the spear out of Wath and get up where he was, which is so depressing, that a child is having to pull the weapon out of a man and having to fight with it. I'm really confused why everyone in the chat is talking about Aardvarks. I assume there's a terribly good reason for it. Anyway, so the fight begins, and there's fucking like children being press ganged into this, and like you can just see how people war transforms people. War is a system that takes people and turns them into soldiers, and that includes children. But I also think it's cool that like Yoren is saying defend the wall. Yoren is a Night's Watch recruiter, and he's defending the wrong wall, isn't he? Like, we've got this fight with these Night's Watchmen on this wall, but this is not the wall they should be on. They should be on the wall in the far north. They should be fighting the others. That's one of the themes throughout, like, Book 5 especially, is the idea that, you know, it's like, who is it? Is it Osher who says, like you shouldn't be riding south, you should be riding north. That's where the real war is. It's this self-destructive quality of war that makes it so horrible. And by the light of the burning town, the fight begins. And some of Armory Lorch's men start climbing up the walls, and Arya slashes down hard and cuts off his fingers, and she screams, Winterfell. So that starkness, that stark identity, rises back up in the heat of battle. It's still there, ready to come out. And Arya thinks sort of hateful things against the enemy. She pushes someone off the wall, and she hopes that he falls on his face and cuts off his tongue. And Hot Pie hacks at someone's hands. Even poor sweet Hot Pie, even sweet delicious Hot Pie is fucking hacking people to pieces. He should be hacking apart meat for pies, not human meat. You know, he should be in the kitchen, but here he is on the walls of battle. War just displaces people. It puts people in the wrong places. It's war might be bad, guys. They've turned a sweet innocent baker into a killer. And so a guy comes and fights Yoren, and Yoren gets the black banner that he was waving. Like, he was waving this black banner saying, like, hey, like, we are Night's Watchmen, don't fight us, and they didn't respect that. So Yoren teaches him to respect the banner, because he tangles the assailant up in the banner, and uses that to stab him and kill him. So it's this nice oh, how did you know that? Ava says how my uncle was bitten by an aardvark and became the president of Spain. That's how did you know that? Anyway, so the fighting is happening, the torches are flying, long tongues of flame. It's this whole apocalyptic vibe, and Arya thinks of Joffrey with his sneering face, and so she rightly makes the connection that this is not happening in a vacuum. The political background is part of why this atrocity is happening, and it's shitheads like Joffrey and government that cause the problems on the ground. And I think that's such an important connection to make. That tissue between the Game of Thrones happening in the luxury and the pomp of King's Landing, and then the grit and the grime and the blood on the ground that's affecting average people in Arya's arc. And Lomi helps this guy Dobber fight a guy, and manages to kill him. And Lomi hoots with victory until he sees the knife in Dobber's belly. So even like these small moments of like joy and victory and accomplishment are like quickly rained on with blood and sadness and defeat. There's very little room for triumph in this chapter. It's all about just the darkness of war. Blood and smoke and iron and piss is what the air smells of. And Arya fights a guy, and like underneath his helmet, he looks afraid, and he's just this old guy, just bald and scared looking. But even as Arya was feeling sorry for him, she was killing him. So the dehumanization that happens. Yes, be like a panda. There is a knife in Dobby's belly. This is a very rare intertextual moment. It's a little known fact that the Harry Potter universe and the Game of Thrones universe interconnect in certain ways. J.K. Rowling and George Martin collaborated with some parts of the story, and indeed the house elf Dobby joins in the battle by the God's Eye, and tragically is stabbed. Game of Thrones, of course, takes place later in the continuity after the Harry Potter series happens, because Game of Thrones is post-apocalyptic. So like Harry Potter happens, Voldemort is defeated, Harry it becomes an aura and hooks up with Hermione, and everything's great until Voldemort. Turns out Voldemort was still alive. just like Palpatine. So he's on the Sith planet, and then Voldemort's like, I'm gonna punish all of the wizards who stopped me being Wizard Hitler, and then he summons a giant moon, a big black Death Star, black rock, oily, greasy stone, and then he does a special spell with a secret Horcrux, and then he slams the black meteor onto Hogwarts, and Hogwarts gets banned the fuck out, and that is where Ashai comes from, because all the dust flies up from the meteor strike, and it's a nuclear winter, and the moon splits, and all of the dragons come out, and the long night happens. So the long night is the horrible apocalypse that the White Walkers are created from. That was a spell that Hagrid did accidentally. Hagrid was like, "Oh no, the long night is happening. I better cool everyone down from these fires." And he's like, "Summonus refrigeratus." But turns out Hagrid's umbrella wand backfired, and that's where the White Walkers come from. So it's all a bit embarrassing. Harry Potter picks up a sword because all the wands stop working when the meteor strikes. Magic gets broken, and he becomes Arthur Dane. But that doesn't end well. Meanwhile, Hermione is the ghost of High Heart. She lasts a bit longer than Arthur Dane does. Ron Weasley becomes Beric Dondarrion, because they're both redheads, right? It's amazing how it all interconnects. And anyway, yeah, Dobby dies. Anyway, so there's a fight happening, and it sucks. And Arya's using the knowledge that Sirio taught her. And just horrible things are happening. People are hacking at people's necks, and children are having to fight, and death is all around Arya, which, if you had to choose one line to sum up Arya's arc, it's that death is all around her, and it changes her. And so Yoren starts shouting, "Get out of here, we're done, we've lost this fight. Oi, Arya, just try and save yourself." And they remember the trapdoor that's in the barn that they can use to escape. So they go for it. And Gendry, meanwhile, is being fucking badass. So, sort of the only moment of, like, the fight being cool is the fact that Gendry is just fighting like Robert Baratheon's son. He's wearing the bull helm, and the light of the fire is reflecting off his eyes and off the horns of the bull. And I think the horns of the bull sort of feel like Baratheon antlers. And Lomi Greenhands got stabbed, which is a downer. Lomi's going to die next chapter, I believe. And the crying girl, Weasel, is sitting in the middle of the chaos, surrounded by smoke and slaughter. So Arya tries and saves her. She drags her along, tries to take her with her. And the animals are screaming because the barn is on fire. All that livestock and stuff that they gathered in the barn. Animals are burning alive. There's a donkey that is screaming, and Arya can smell the stench of its burning hair as it's caught in a ring of fire, shrieking in terror and pain. And it's this really depressing reality that, like, along with every human tragedy is a tragedy for the natural world and for animals that is always fucking 10 times as bad, but which we never pay much attention to. Whenever there's a war, whenever there's a famine, whenever there's a fire, animals die and suffer, and we never pay much attention to it. It's just seen as acceptable casualties. But, like, even just in the natural, even outside of disaster, even every day, there's animals eating each other and suffering from disease and starvation, and that's just sort of normal. It's so much suffering that we never think about every day. I told you this episode was a downer. So Gendry's running around being a badass, and Jaqen H'ghar shouts for help. And Arya's like, all right, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to run out and save Jaqen before we escape through this trapdoor. And so she does it. She goes and gets the axe that Gendry was using to chop wood. And she gives the axe to the people in the cage so that Rorge and Baita and Jaqen can escape. And then, that's sort of like a heroic moment, but it's also morally neutral at best because she's rescuing fucking Rouge and Biter, who are fucking monsters and who kill people. So is it even a good thing that Arya did this like merciful thing? And Arya's killing people, and it's horrible, and the barn is burning, and it's like a furnace. And it's just hell. Everyone's dying, everyone's screaming, humans and animals alike. And Arya runs into the tunnel, and she jumps down, and she tastes dirt, and she tastes mud and water and worms and life. And under the earth, the air is cool and dark. And it's this, and again, like nature is like sanctuary versus like the horror of humanity above her. And she crawls through the tunnel, and then the barn collapses in the distance behind her, and this hot smoke and black dust comes billowing up around her, smelling of hell. And Arya holds her breath and kisses the mud on the floor and cries for who she could not say. And that's how the chapter ends. It just ends in this collapse of despair and misery after the horror of this war. They survived. That's the best they can say. That's about the best thing that happened. Lomi got stabbed. Yoren dies, we later find out. No one really achieved anything. The attack was pointless. They didn't care about Arya. They were just out there to kill some people. It's not. It's needless. It's pointless violence. And I keep picking up on this thread of like nature throughout, interwoven with this chapter. Like it started with the beautiful blue-green river and the hawk flying in lazy circles. It's like there's this natural state that is so good and pure that is ruined by humans coming in and burning everything. And we see how war changes people. We see how even fucking Hot Pie turns into a murderous killer when you put a sword in his hands. Everyone's reduced to an agent of violence. They lose their identity. They lose who they are. They lose honor. They lose words. They lose allegiance. They lose politics and kings and power. Everything collapses. Adventure sucks. Even the hopes that Arya had before of running around and doing cool things falls to pieces. Even Arya's heroic moment of trying to save Jaqen and Rouge and Biter achieves little. This is a deeply bleak, nihilistic moment where we start to see the full consequences of the Game of Thrones and everything that had happened before. And so basically, don't tell you I didn't warn you. Thank you so much for participating in this episode of Game of Thrones Abridged, episode 88. That was the 15th chapter of Clash of Kings. I hope you enjoyed. We'll do more of these episodes at times, I'm sure. And go chuck us a review on Apple Podcasts. And cheers. Keep throwing those hello rocks around. And keep brushing your teeth. And if you do one jumping jack one day and then 2 jumping jacks the next day, and you keep doing one more every day, eventually you'll just be doing jumping jacks continually forever. And that's why I don't recommend it. So have a good one, and cheers.